In every town, there are people who seem untouchable. They wear uniforms, hold titles, and carry the weight of authority with ease. Their words bring comfort, their presence brings reassurance, and their promises are trusted without hesitation. These are the individuals society relies on in its most vulnerable moments, the protectors, the guardians of safety and order. But what happens when that trust is misplaced? What happens when the shield of authority hides something far darker, and the person sworn to uphold justice becomes the one who undermines it? David Carter was that man, a decorated FBI agent with an impeccable record, a devoted husband, a father, and a respected figure in his community. His name was spoken with admiration, his badge a symbol of everything that was right with the system. To those around him, he was the epitome of integrity, a man who seemed immune to the flaws that plague ordinary lives. And yet, behind the facade of honor and service, something else was unfolding, something no one could have imagined. This story begins in a small, tight-knit town, where neighbors knew each other by name, and children grew up believing the world was a safe place. It was a community bound by trust, the kind of place where secrets had no room to hide, or so it seemed, because some secrets don't live in shadows. They hide in plain sight, disguised as smiles and handshakes, concealed behind roles and reputations. David Carter's secret wasn't buried in the dark. It was hidden in the very life he had built, in the relationships he had cultivated, and in the trust he had so effortlessly earned. This is the story of Rachel Evans, a 17-year-old girl full of ambition and hope. She dreamed of one day following in David's footsteps, of wearing a badge and serving her country. She admired him, trusted him, and saw him as the mentor who would help her achieve her goals. But that trust became her undoing. Rachel's admiration turned into dependence. Her ambition became the key to her manipulation, and her life was caught in the grip of a man willing to destroy everything to protect his own secrets. What began as mentorship turned into a betrayal so profound it would tear apart not only Rachel's life, but the lives of everyone who loved her. This is not a story about a single crime. It is a story about the unraveling of a family, the shattering of a community, and the haunting question, how could this happen? How could someone entrusted with so much power use it to commit such unimaginable acts? David Carter wasn't just a man of influence. He was a man of control. Control over his image, his family, and, most tragically, over Rachel Evans. This is the story of how he used his authority to manipulate a young girl, how he betrayed her trust and the trust of an entire town, and how his desperation to cover his tracks ended in murder. It is a story that reminds us that power without accountability is a dangerous thing. A story that reveals the lengths someone will go to protect their lies, no matter the cost. This isn't just about the loss of one life. It's about the ripple effect that betrayal has on a community. It's about a family left with unanswerable questions, a town forced to reconcile its faith in authority, and a system that allowed a man like David Carter to operate unchecked. As we unravel this story, you'll see how trust can be weaponized, how manipulation can be hidden in plain sight, and how even the most respected figures can fall from grace in the most devastating ways. As you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, what would you do if the person you trusted most was hiding a terrible secret? How do we ensure that those in power are held accountable before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Together, let's explore the lessons this story has to teach and the ways we can protect ourselves from those who hide behind a badge of trust. There are places where the world seems untouched by the chaos that lurks beyond their borders. Small towns, where the streets are lined with neatly kept homes, where neighbors greet each other by name, and where trust is not earned, it is simply given. In these places, safety is assumed and danger feels like a far-off concept reserved for the nightly news. But trust is a fragile thing, especially when placed in the wrong hands. This town was no different. It was a quiet, unassuming community, where life followed a rhythm as familiar as the changing seasons. Children played on tree-lined streets, laughter echoing through the air. Families gathered on weekends for cookouts, their lives intertwined in ways only a small town could offer. The people here believed in each other, and, more importantly, they believed in those tasked with keeping them safe. And no one embodied that trust more than David Carter. As an FBI agent, he was a figure of respect and admiration. His sharp suits and calm demeanor spoke of authority, while his warm smile and easy confidence reassured those around him. To the town, he wasn't just an agent, he was a protector, a husband to Lisa, a father to 2 daughters, and a man who seemed to balance the weight of his responsibilities with grace. He attended community events, shook hands with local leaders, and always seemed to have time to listen to a neighbor's concern. David Carter was, simply put, the kind of man people wanted to believe in. Among those who admired him was Rachel Evans, a 17-year-old girl who had grown up dreaming of making a difference. She was bright, driven, and full of ambition. Her goal was to one day wear a badge of her own, to join the ranks of people like David Carter, and prove that she, too, could protect and serve. Rachel's admiration for him wasn't just about his job. It was about who she thought he was, a man of integrity, someone who had achieved everything she aspired to be. Rachel wasn't just another face in the crowd. Her family, the Evanses, shared a deep bond with the Carters. Her father, Marcus Evans, was David's colleague, a man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him through years of service. Their families were intertwined by friendship, trust, and countless shared memories. Barbecues in the backyard, holiday dinners, and quiet Sunday afternoons filled with laughter. Rachel had grown up seeing David as more than a role model. To her, he was practically family. But trust, even in the closest relationships, can be deceptive. Beneath the surface of friendly smiles and shared meals, cracks can form. And those cracks, invisible to the naked eye, can eventually shatter everything. For Rachel, her admiration for David would lead her down a path she couldn't foresee, a path that would blur the lines between mentor and something far more dangerous. This is where the foundation of betrayal was laid, not in grand gestures or dramatic turns, but in the quiet moments of trust that no one thought to question. This was a town where people believed in heroes, where no one thought to ask what might be hidden behind the polished veneer of a man like David Carter. And it was that belief, that unshakable faith, that would soon be tested in ways no one could have imagined. Have you ever had someone in your life who seemed too good to be true? Someone who seemed incapable of wrongdoing, only for your perception to shift? Share your experiences in the comments, and let's discuss how we define trust and recognize its limits. It began with an offer, a simple gesture, harmless on the surface, wrapped in the language of encouragement and opportunity. For a 17-year-old girl with big dreams and boundless ambition, it was exactly the kind of moment she had been waiting for. Someone she admired, someone who had already achieved everything she aspired to, was willing to guide her, To Rachel Evans, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. She had no reason to question it. Why would she? This was David Carter, after all, a man she trusted implicitly, a man her family had known for years. But trust, once extended, can open doors to places no one ever intended to go. The conversation started casually enough. A passing question about her future, a comment about her potential, a suggestion that her goals were within reach if only she had the right guidance. He made her feel seen in a way few others had. He spoke with the kind of authority and confidence that came from experience, and Rachel hung on every word. She believed he could help her because he made her believe it. And so, what began as fleeting exchanges quickly grew into something more structured, more personal. David framed it as mentorship. He told her he saw something special in her, that she had the drive and intelligence to succeed in a field where so few women thrived. It was a narrative she wanted to believe. It was a story she had written for herself long before she ever met him, and he knew exactly how to play into it. The meetings started in public spaces, a coffee shop near the FBI field office, a quiet corner of the library. They talked about her studies, her aspirations, and the obstacles she might face. He asked questions that made her feel important, questions that made her think he cared about more than just her goals. But the dynamic began to shift. The conversations grew longer, the tone more intimate. He started sharing stories from his own career, stories that painted him as a mentor, a protector, someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and still come out on the other side. He made her feel lucky to have his attention, lucky to have someone like him in her corner. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boundaries between professional guidance and personal connection began to blur. It wasn't long before the meetings moved to less public places, his office after hours, his home when no one else was there. Always under the guise of preparation, of helping her achieve the future she dreamed of. He told her she needed to work harder than everyone else, that she needed to be smarter, stronger, more prepared. And he told her he could help her get there. Rachel trusted him because she wanted to believe in the vision he painted, a vision of herself as capable, successful, and respected. What she didn't see, what no one saw, was the calculation behind every word he spoke. David Carter wasn't just offering guidance. He was laying the groundwork for something far more dangerous. He was isolating her, making her dependent on his approval, his validation, every time she opened up to him, every time she shared a fear or a hope. He tightened his hold on her life. And he did it so subtly, so methodically, that even Rachel didn't realize what was happening. The shift was gradual, almost invisible. It wasn't marked by a single moment or decision, but by a series of small, seemingly insignificant steps that led her deeper into his orbit. He framed himself as the one person who truly understood her, the one person who could help her succeed. He made her believe that their connection was unique, that it was something worth protecting. And Rachel, driven by her ambition and blinded by her trust, believed him. Do you think there were warning signs Rachel's family or friends might have missed? Looking back, how can we recognize when someone crosses the line between mentor and manipulator? Share your thoughts in the comments below. There are moments that change everything, moments so unexpected, so life-altering, they leave no room for going back. For Rachel Evans, that moment came quietly, without warning, in the privacy of her room. The symptoms had been easy to dismiss at first: fatigue, nausea, an unshakable sense that something was different. But when the second line appeared on the test in her trembling hand, the weight of her reality crashed down around her. She wasn't just a teenager chasing her dreams anymore. She was pregnant, and the father was a man the world thought of as untouchable. Rachel sat frozen, her heart pounding as 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. She hadn't planned for this, hadn't even considered it a possibility, and yet the undeniable truth stared back at her, shaking the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her life and her future. This wasn't just her secret, it was his as well, and telling him would change everything. When she finally found the courage to speak to David Carter, it was during one of their private meetings. The words were hard to find, her voice trembling as she explained what the test had revealed. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that stretches so long it feels like the world itself has stopped turning. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply stared at her, his expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and fear. David's mind raced, calculating the consequences faster than he could process the words. This wasn't just a complication. It was a threat to his career, to his carefully curated image, to the life he had worked so hard to protect. He had spent years building his reputation as a respected FBI agent, a devoted husband, a trusted father. And now, with a single revelation, it all hung by a thread. His initial response was denial. He told her it couldn't be true, that there must have been a mistake. But Rachel's resolve was firm. She was scared, yes, but she wasn't backing down. The test was accurate, and the life growing inside her was undeniable. David's panic began to surface, his voice sharpening as he grasped for control. This couldn't happen. It couldn't be allowed to happen. He told her they needed to fix this, that the problem had to be dealt with before anyone found out. But Rachel didn't see it as a problem. She saw it as a life, a future, a part of herself she wasn't willing to give up. As the days passed, David's desperation grew. He begged, he reasoned, he tried to manipulate her into seeing things his way. He told her it would ruin everything, for him, for her, for both of them. He painted a picture of what would happen if the truth came out. The scandal, the fallout, the lives destroyed. But no matter how hard he pushed, Rachel held her ground. She wasn't going to terminate the pregnancy, no matter what he said. For David, it was a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Every conversation with her, every refusal, every firm declaration that she was keeping the baby tightened the noose around his double life. He began to feel the walls closing in, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a crushing tide. And with each passing day, his panic gave way to something else, something darker. He wasn't just fighting for his reputation anymore. He was fighting to maintain the life he had spent years building. And in his mind, that life was worth any cost. If you were Rachel, what would you have done in this situation? How do you think someone should handle a moment like this when their trust is shattered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The evening was unremarkable to anyone watching from the outside. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet town, while the streets emptied and families settled into their nightly routines. But far away from the warmth of home and the hum of ordinary life, something was about to happen. Something planned with cold precision and executed with a kind of determination that left no room for hesitation. This wasn't a crime of passion, not a moment of chaos or confusion. It was something far worse. David Carter had made the call earlier that day. His voice was calm, his tone steady, as he told Rachel they needed to talk. He framed it as a chance to discuss the future, to make plans for what came next. He promised answers, a solution, reassurance. Rachel hesitated but agreed, trusting him one last time. After all, he had been a guiding force in her life, someone she looked up to even as doubts crept in. She didn't know that this meeting would be her last. The location he chose was deliberate, isolated, far from the prying eyes of the town, a place where questions would never be asked. A small cabin at the edge of the woods, the kind of place where silence reigned and the world felt impossibly distant. He told her it would be private, a space where they could speak openly, away from the noise and judgment of others. And she believed him. When Rachel arrived, the cabin was quiet, the air heavy with the stillness of the surrounding forest. David greeted her with the same reassuring smile he had always worn, the same demeanor that had made him so trusted. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The table was set for two, wine glasses waiting to be filled. It seemed thoughtful, almost kind, as though he truly intended to make things right. But the truth was far darker than anything Rachel could have imagined. They talked, just as he had promised. He spoke of challenges, of obstacles they would face, of the ways they might move forward. He poured her a glass of wine, his movements smooth, practiced, hiding the tremor in his hands. And as she sipped, she began to feel it, the heaviness in her limbs, the fog creeping into her mind, the sudden, inescapable exhaustion. Confusion flickered across her face as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "I don't feel well," she murmured, her voice barely audible. He was at her side in an instant, his hand resting on her shoulder, his words soft and reassuring. "It's okay," he said. "You just need to rest." But there was no comfort in his voice, no warmth in his touch. Only a cold resolve. Rachel's body grew limp as the drug took hold, her head lolling to the side as the room around her faded into darkness. For a moment he stood there, watching her, his mind racing with the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't a moment of hesitation. It was calculation. He had convinced himself this was the only way, the only path that would allow him to keep his life intact. In his mind, there was no other choice. He carried her to his truck, her unconscious form cradled in his arms, and drove deep into the woods. The road stretched endlessly before him, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the pounding of his own heartbeat. The spot he had chosen was remote, far from any trail or sign of human presence. The forest stood as a silent witness, its shadows growing darker with each passing minute. He stepped out of the truck, lifted her once more, and walked into the trees, his footsteps muffled by the damp earth. In the quiet of the forest, he did what he had come to do. His hands moved with a terrible certainty, every action deliberate, every movement final. Rachel's life ended there, beneath the canopy of trees, her voice silenced, her dreams extinguished. And when it was done, he dug a shallow grave, the dirt flying beneath his hands as the weight of his actions settled over him. He worked quickly, methodically, covering the evidence of what he had done, burying the truth along with her body. And then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to the world he had so carefully built. David Carter walked back into his life, a life filled with respect, admiration, and trust, as though he hadn't just betrayed everything those around him believed in. He stood before Rachel's family, her friends, the town, and played the role of the concerned protector. He led the search for her with the same confidence that had earned him their trust in the first place. But beneath the surface, beneath the mask he wore so well, was the chilling reality of a man who had committed the ultimate betrayal. What drives someone to commit such an unspeakable act to cover their mistakes? Is it fear, selfishness, or something far more complex? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The disappearance of Rachel Evans struck the town like a thunderclap, shattering the calm they had always taken for granted. A vibrant young girl, beloved by friends and family, had vanished without a trace. Whispers spread quickly, turning to murmurs of fear and speculation. In moments like these, people looked for a steady hand, a voice of reason, someone to guide them through the chaos. And David Carter stepped forward, embodying the very authority they so desperately needed. He stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, and determined. But beneath the surface of his calculated calm was a secret only he knew, a secret buried in the very woods he now vowed to search. As lead investigator, he wore his concern like a second skin. He addressed press conferences with practiced empathy, promising the town he would not rest until Rachel was found. His voice carried a weight that stilled the doubts of even the most fearful. He assured Rachel's grieving parents that every resource would be devoted to finding her, that he would personally oversee every detail of the investigation. And they believed him, because why wouldn't they? He was David Carter, the man who had always been there for them, a man who had earned their trust through years of friendship and loyalty. They didn't see the guilt in his eyes or hear the strain beneath his words. To them, he was their anchor in the storm. In those early days, the search was relentless. Volunteers combed the woods, police set up checkpoints, and the media amplified Rachel's image, turning her face into a symbol of hope and urgency. David was everywhere, directing teams, briefing the public, comforting the Evans family. He played his role flawlessly, maintaining a facade so convincing that no one thought to question him. But every step of the investigation was carefully controlled. Every lead was scrutinized, not for its promise of answers, but for its potential to uncover the truth he had buried. When tips came in, he redirected them to dead ends. When evidence surfaced, he found ways to explain it away. His authority gave him the power to shape the narrative, to steer the investigation in directions that led nowhere. And with each passing day, he bought himself more time, more distance from the crime he had committed. To the outside world, his dedication seemed unwavering. To those who worked alongside him, his composure under pressure was remarkable. But in the quiet moments, when no one was watching, the weight of his actions pressed down on him like a stone. Perhaps the most chilling part was his interaction with Rachel's parents. He sat with them in their living room, listening to their anguish as they clung to the hope that their daughter would come home. He offered them comfort, reassured them with promises he knew he could never keep. He even shared in their tears, a performance so convincing it left no room for doubt. To Marcus Evans, his longtime colleague and friend, David's presence was a lifeline. He trusted him completely, leaning on him in the darkest moments. And all the while, David carried the unbearable weight of the truth he could never share. For weeks, the search continued, a relentless effort that consumed the town. Candlelight vigils were held, prayers were offered, and yet there was no sign of Rachel. The community rallied around her family, united in their determination to find her. And at the center of it all stood David Carter, the man they believed in, the man who had orchestrated it all. He stood before them as the picture of dedication, all while ensuring the truth remained buried. But secrets, no matter how deeply hidden, have a way of surfacing. and the facade he had built so carefully was beginning to crack. How do you think someone can maintain such a facade under this kind of pressure? Is it guilt, fear, or something deeper that allows them to keep going? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The forest had always been a place of quiet refuge. Its towering trees and tangled undergrowth seemed to stretch endlessly, offering a stillness that felt untouched by time. For months, it had kept its secret, its silence unbroken, its shadows undisturbed. But secrets rarely stay buried forever. And one ordinary afternoon, when the sun filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, two hikers, unaware of the weight their discovery would carry, wandered off the beaten path. What they found would shatter the quiet and unravel the carefully constructed lies of a man who had hidden his crime in the very earth they now walked. It started with a smell, faint but distinct, carried on the soft breeze. They paused, exchanging uneasy glances before venturing closer. The soil beneath their feet seemed uneven, disturbed in a way that felt out of place in the natural order of the forest. A few more steps, and they saw it. A patch of earth slightly raised, its surface broken by something that shouldn't have been there. At first, they hesitated, unsure of what they were looking at. But as they knelt closer, their unease turned to alarm. There, beneath the surface, was the unmistakable truth, a human body, hastily buried, its presence crying out for the justice that had been denied. The authorities were called, and the small clearing that had been untouched for months became a hive of activity. Crime scene tape stretched between the trees, the hum of radios breaking the forest's stillness. Forensic teams worked meticulously, carefully unearthing what had been buried so carelessly. Rachel Evans had been found. The questions that had haunted the town for months now had an answer, though it was far more horrifying than anyone had dared to imagine. It didn't take long for the pieces to start falling into place. The shallow grave yielded more than just a body. It held evidence that would crack open the facade David Carter had so painstakingly built. Fragments of clothing, traces of a sedative still lingering in her system, and, most damning of all, DNA evidence linking her to the man who had once led the search to find her. The forest had kept its secret, but the evidence it offered told a story that couldn't be denied. But it wasn't just the grave that unraveled him. Investigators turned their attention to David's movements in the weeks leading up to Rachel's disappearance. Surveillance footage from gas stations and traffic cameras painted a damning picture. GPS data from his phone placed him in the area of the grave on the night she vanished. His carefully maintained alibi began to crumble, each piece of evidence chipping away at the image he had constructed. The man who had been the town's protector, its pillar of trust, now stood exposed as the architect of its greatest betrayal. The confrontation came swiftly. Faced with the mountain of evidence against him, David Carter had nowhere to turn. For the first time, his composure faltered. The man who had spoken with unwavering confidence at press conferences, who had comforted Rachel's parents with a steady hand on their shoulders, now sat across from investigators with nowhere to hide. The walls of his double life had closed in, leaving him trapped by the very lies he had told. And when the moment came, when the weight of it all became too much to bear, he broke. His confession poured out like a flood, each word dragging him further from the man he had pretended to be, and closer to the monster he truly was. The town's silence had been shattered, its trust obliterated. Rachel's grave, hidden for months beneath the earth, had become the catalyst for uncovering the truth. And now, with David's confession, the full weight of his betrayal came crashing down. He was no longer the protector, the family man, or the hero. He was the man who had destroyed it all, and the community he left behind would never see him the same way again. Do you believe every crime eventually leaves enough evidence to be uncovered? Or are some secrets destined to stay hidden forever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint rustle of papers and the soft murmur of whispers. Rows of seats filled with onlookers who had come to witness the reckoning of a man once held in the highest regard. They sat shoulder to shoulder, neighbors, friends, colleagues, all grappling with the same haunting question. How had it come to this? At the front of the room, beneath the imposing gaze of the judge, sat David Carter. His once proud shoulders were now hunched, his hands trembling as they rested on the table before him. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, stripping away the confident facade he had worn for so long. This was no longer the man they thought they knew. This was someone else entirely. The trial began with the prosecutor's voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The charges against him were read aloud, each word a blow that echoed in the hearts of those who had trusted him. The evidence was laid bare, piece by piece, painting a picture so vivid, so damning, there was no room left for doubt. Surveillance footage, forensic reports, and chilling details from his own confession were presented with unrelenting precision. The prosecution didn't just tell the story of Rachel Evans's murder, they built it, brick by brick, until it stood like an unshakable monument to David's guilt. And then came the testimonies. Rachel's parents were the first to take the stand. Her mother's voice cracked under the weight of her grief as she spoke of her daughter's laughter, her dreams, and the unimaginable void left in their lives. Her father, a man who had once called David a friend, stared at him with eyes filled with anger and sorrow. His words were steady, but his pain was unmistakable. "You were supposed to protect her," he said, his voice trembling. "You were supposed to be someone we could trust." The courtroom felt smaller in that moment, the air heavier, as if everyone in the room could feel the weight of his betrayal. David's own family was called to testify. His wife Lisa stood before the court, her composure fraying at the edges. She spoke of the man she thought she had married, the father of her children, and the unbearable truth she now had to face. Her words weren't just for the jury. They were for him, the man who had torn their lives apart with his lies. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said, her voice breaking, "but you're not the man I thought you were." His daughters, too young to take the stand, sat quietly in the gallery, their eyes downcast, their innocence forever tainted by their father's actions. And then, finally, David himself was called to testify. He rose slowly, his movements heavy, as though the weight of his guilt was a physical thing. His voice, once so commanding, now faltered as he began to speak. He confessed to everything, the affair, the murder, the cover-up, with a halting, broken tone that betrayed the enormity of his regret. Tears streamed down his face as he described the moment he realized there was no turning back, the moment he chose to bury not just Rachel's body, but the life he had spent years building. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve it." But his tears brought no comfort to those in the room. They were not a balm for the pain he had caused. They were the hollow echoes of a man who had destroyed everything he touched. When the sentencing came, the judge's words were final and unwavering. David Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The room remained silent as the weight of the verdict settled over them. Justice had been served, but the wounds left behind would take far longer to heal. Rachel's family clung to each other, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and sorrow. David's family sat frozen, their world irreparably shattered. And the town, once united by trust in their local hero, was left grappling with the aftermath of his betrayal. Do you think justice was served in this case? Was a life sentence without parole enough to account for the depth of his betrayal and the pain he caused? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. When the trial was over, and the gavel struck its final blow, the silence that followed was deafening. The courtroom emptied, the cameras stopped flashing, and the town was left to reckon with the aftermath of a crime that had broken far more than just one family. The echoes of betrayal didn't fade. They lingered in the air, in the streets, in the hearts of those who had once believed in the man who destroyed everything. Justice had been served, but the wounds it left behind were deep and jagged, their edges cutting into the fabric of a community that would never be the same. For Rachel's family, the pain was immeasurable. The image of their daughter, the bright, ambitious girl who had dreamed of achieving so much, was now forever tied to the memory of her final moments. But from their grief rose a determination to ensure that her life, though cut short, would continue to make an impact. They founded a foundation in her name, a beacon of hope for young women who had suffered abuse and betrayal. The organization offered counseling, legal aid, and advocacy, ensuring that no one else would face the silence Rachel endured. For her parents, it was a way to channel their sorrow into action, to give their daughter's story a purpose beyond the pain. David's family, however, was left in the shadow of his actions. The man they had loved, the man they had trusted, was gone, not in body, but in every way that mattered. Lisa Carter and her daughters became pariahs in a town that now saw them only through the lens of his betrayal. They moved away, seeking anonymity in a place where their name didn't carry the weight of scandal. But even in a new town, the scars remained. For Lisa, there was no escaping the memories of the life they once shared, or the realization that she had been living with a man capable of such horrific acts. For his daughters, the truth was even harder to process. The father they had adored had become a stranger, his actions a shadow over their lives. The town itself struggled to move forward. For years, David Carter had been a symbol of trust and integrity, a man who represented the very best of law enforcement. His betrayal left a void that couldn't easily be filled. Residents questioned everything they thought they knew about the people in power. Trust, once so freely given, became something harder to offer. But the community refused to let his actions define them. Leaders worked tirelessly to rebuild the faith that had been shattered, implementing new policies to ensure accountability and transparency within law enforcement. Town meetings became spaces for honest conversation, where residents voiced their concerns and demanded change. Slowly, step by step, they began to piece together the fragments of their broken trust. Rachel's name became a symbol, not just of loss, but of resilience. Her story was told not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. Schools introduced programs to educate young people about boundaries, manipulation, and the importance of speaking out. Local organizations partnered with Rachel's foundation to amplify its reach, ensuring that her legacy extended far beyond the borders of their small town. And while the pain of her loss could never be erased, her memory became a catalyst for change, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is room for light to break through. how can communities rebuild trust after such deep betrayals? What steps do you think are necessary to ensure something like this never happens again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss how we can move forward together. Trust is a fragile thing. It's built over years, through actions that inspire confidence and loyalty. But it takes only a moment, a single betrayal, to shatter it into pieces that may never fully be restored. The story of David Carter and Rachel Evans isn't just about one man's crimes or one family's loss. It's about the deeper, more troubling questions that linger long after the case is closed. How could someone entrusted with so much power abuse it so completely? How do communities recover from betrayals that cut to the very core of their beliefs? And most importantly, how do we ensure that it never happens again? David's actions were not born in isolation. They were enabled by a system that gave him authority without sufficient accountability, by a community that trusted without question, and by the very human tendency to believe in the people who wear badges and uniforms. It's a sobering reminder that power, left unchecked, can corrupt even those we hold in the highest regard. It's a reminder that trust must always be balanced with vigilance, and that the systems meant to protect us can also be manipulated to harm us if we are not careful. Rachel's story is a stark example of what happens when the warning signs are ignored, when the lines between authority and exploitation blur, and when those with power use it to serve themselves instead of the people they are meant to protect. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about the individuals involved, but about the institutions and cultures that allowed this to happen. It forces us to ask hard questions. How many more stories like Rachel's are out there, untold and unresolved? How many lives have been quietly destroyed by the very people tasked with keeping them safe? But it also leaves room for hope. Rachel's legacy, through the foundation her family created, proves that even in the darkest moments, change is possible. Her story has sparked conversations, reforms, and a renewed commitment to protecting the most vulnerable among us. It serves as a reminder that while we can't change the past, we can learn from it. We can demand better systems, stronger safeguards, and a culture of accountability that doesn't allow predators to hide behind positions of trust. We owe it to Rachel, and to every person who has ever suffered in silence, to do better. This case is more than a story. It's a call to action. Share this video, discuss it with your friends and family, and help ensure that stories like Rachel's are never forgotten. Awareness is the first step toward prevention, and every conversation brings us closer to a world where abuse of power is met with swift and unyielding consequences. What systems do you think should be in place to prevent abuses of power like this? How can communities hold authority figures accountable while still supporting those who truly serve with integrity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation that matters. Stay tuned for our next true crime case, where we uncover another shocking betrayal of trust, a story of power, corruption, and the fight for justice. You won't want to miss it.